What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Destination the Show. This is episode 66. It is Wednesday, January 29th. I am Jamie Cameron, joined as always by Mr. Jeremy Nygaard. Jeremy, I'm fresh off of seeing you and Theo in person at the Twins Daily Winter Meltdown.
True.
How's that for you, my friend?
I'm awful. Everything's awful. I'm playing. I'm good. Things are good. Weather's better, right? Yeah, Meltdown was fun. We could talk more about that as we get into things, but everything's good. How are you doing over on the other side of the river?
I'm doing fantastic, Jeremy. Fantastic. You know what?
Really?
I am. I'm in a really good mood. First time for everything. I ate dinner and it was still light out this evening. That was
Okay.
great. The meltdown
Okay.
was awesome. I enjoyed the interviews, in particular with Simeon Woods Richardson. I thought was extremely charismatic. We have an exciting episode. We got baseball stuff to chop it up on today, so I got nothing to complain about for once.
That's awesome. That's really good news.
Yeah. Unusual and good news. We're going to flip the script a little bit today. Before we jump into off-season news and updates, we're going to do housekeeping right from the jump because we always leave this till last and everyone else does it first. So we're going to do it first too. So want to encourage folks to like and subscribe to the show, places where you can find the content, any podcast platform of your choice. You can also find video. Any video of episodes that we do is at our YouTube channel, which is at Destination the Show. If you want to get in touch with us, you can do so on Twitter at DTS_pod1, on Blue Sky, which is a much more pleasant social media experience at Destination the Show. Or if you want to send us a question the old-fashioned way, we got an email address too. So that's destinationtheshow@gmail.com. I enjoy, in particular, getting emails from people. They're usually very kind. The questions are awesome. We really enjoy the interactions. Hello to Jeremy's dog also. So get in touch with the show. We'd be delighted to hear from you, but we're going to jump in, Jeremy, to some off-season news and updates. And today we're going to start with the Twins. Because that's not who we'll spend the majority of this episode talking about. So we're going to jump into some Twins-related things right from the jump. And I'm gonna mix and match here a little bit, Jeremy. In the last week, it was reported that the Twins had interest in trading for Padres ace Dylan Cease. And so we didn't get a chance to talk really about this, but I want to get your take on it. Obviously, there was excitement from folks because news has been just so absent for Twins fans this long off season. I think there was also a good mixture of surprise there too, right? Knowing the strength of this team is heavily grounded in its rotation. So what did you make of the Dan Hayes of the Athletic story that the Twins were engaged with the Padres, at least on some kind of a high level over Dylan Cease?
Yeah, it was interesting because I think the intention of his story was to let people know that the Padres and Twins had talked about Vasquez because there was some interest in the Twins moving him. There was some interest in the Padres acquiring a veteran catcher. But in the third paragraph, it's like, by the way, the Twins would like to have Dylan Cease. Sure, right? I mean, is he the only Padre that the Twins would like to have on their team? I guess Manny Machado would be interesting to have as well. And so, I didn't listen to he was on Gleeman the Geek afterwards and mentioned about this, taking that with a big grain of salt, right? And I think that's kind of the similar thing. Like you have a conversation with a team and all of a sudden you're like, hey, what do you think about this guy? And trade talks go nowhere. I don't know actually what happened. Does it make sense that a baseball team would have interest in a really good pitcher? It does, right? But I don't know how that was ever going to line up because the asking price was probably going to be a ton to get him. But if the Twins are kicking the tires on things like that, good for them. Now the Padres have signed some other veteran catcher and. Right. Sounds like the Vasquez thing's not going to happen anyway. So, but the Twins and Padres have hooked up on weird deals late in the spring training before. So who knows what's going to happen over the next month?
So let me ask you a question more globally then, Jeremy, because you're right. The Padres have since signed Elias Diaz. So they have their catching option locked in, seemingly taking them off the table for Vasquez. Do you see a possibility of the Twins trading for a starter in order to, I guess, catalyze like a series of moves, right? Maybe they acquire a starter, trade one of their 3 starters. It seems so illogical to hear of Cease, a guy who's in his final year of team control, who's not too expensive, but for the Twins, he's expensive. I think he's projected to make 13 point something million this year. It did not seem like a fit that made a ton of sense, given that the Padres were likely going to be asking for high upside young prospects. So do you see a situation where the Twins pivot to another starter and potentially have a series of moves coming at some point in February before pitchers and catchers report here?
To see a series of moves coming at this point, I think would be kind of surprising because they've done literally nothing, right? Will they probably make some moves? I would guess so. But the thing that and we'll talk about this here in a little bit, like the going price for a player who's making $10 to $15 million is really not a whole lot if they can get off of that salary. And so I have a hard time right now gauging the value of players just because there's some teams that seem so strapped for cash.
Yep.
And so if a team's willing to give away a really good player because they can't afford to pay him $15 million, like what would the Padres be willing to, like how low would the Padres be willing to go to get out of that money?
Right.
And we can talk more about that here when we get to the trade that happened, but I could see some more weird things happening just because I think given the revenue that the teams are not making, that's relatively unexpected, right? In the grand scheme of things, they were anticipating this money, and now it's not going to happen. Like there's you're willing to do some weird deals, and so we can talk about that more. But do I see a series of moves coming? I certainly don't. Will there be a couple of maybe not huge moves that finalize the roster? That to me seems more likely.
Well, way to pour cold water on my fun,
Great
Jeremy.
day.
That's very boring. I was in a good mood, now I'm not. Okay.
Well, what do you think? Is this something that you think is going to happen?
No, I've just been trying to talk myself into understanding the logic of acquiring a rental type pitcher who's more expensive than the guy that you are reportedly trying to move to shed salary anyway, right? And so I've really been struggling. So my strategy, Jeremy, has just been to ask everyone, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? Does this make sense to you?
Okay.
And I think one thing that I do think is fair about the Twins, and Nick Nelson had a good piece up on this in the last day or so at Twins Daily, is they have in February typically done their creative roster shopping, be that via trade, free agent acquisition, whatever the case may be. I think the Pablo for Luis Ariz trade, which at the time was really seen as like a challenge trade, right? And it's worked out much better for the Twins, I think you could say, than for the Marlins. And so I guess what I'm trying to do in order to stay optimistic, Jeremy, and engage in this offseason, which has been much more fun in thinking about the other teams that we cover than the Twins, is just leave myself open to the possibility that they're going to do something pretty unexpected between now and opening day. And you might be right. It might just be low wattage. Who's a guy who we can plug into first base. But I'm not ruling something more interesting off the table, I guess.
That's fair.
Okay, here's my actual Twins news for the week that I'm excited to dig into with you. Jeremy, the Twins have a new top 100 prospect. It is list season, and lists have been dropping all over the place. Baseball America released their new top 100. MLB Pipeline released their new top 100. A guy who I know you think highly of, Kylie McDaniel, who writes for ESPN, released his top 100 today. And the Twins have a new top 100 prospect featured on his list that I don't believe is featured on any others, and that is right-handed pitcher Charlie Soto. So I wanted to take some time to dig into this with you a little bit. First, your reaction to Soto being named as a top 100 guy by McDaniel, is that a surprise to you at all? Do you get the logic there? How does that line up with kind of your own Twins ranking without giving too much away? Because you, Theo, and I are going to do a Twins top 10 in a couple of weeks here.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little surprised to see his name on there because just from the perspective of we've had a lot of debate about who that number one pitching prospect is in the Twins system, and Soto is a big arm, but is so far away that you're really banking on upside, which I think you can certainly do, but it's harder with pitchers, right? I mean, you've seen guys that would be a AA and would be just rolling, and then all of a sudden they fall off the face of the planet. And so to take a 19-year-old who hasn't really thrown much and to throw him at the top 100, I think is a conversation piece. But there's probably legitimately 70, 80 guys that could be in contention to make that bottom 10th of the top 100.
Agreed.
And so I think there's, you kind of, as prospect guys, you kind of hitch your wagon to certain prospects that if you hit on, people are like, yep, that guy knows what he's talking about. And if you missed on, you're like, well, that guy really missed on that guy. And so McDaniel's going to be kind of the high water mark.
The high guy on Soto. Yeah.
I would guess for, the next 3 or 4 years. And if he turns out to be a top 50 guy and then a top 30 guy, we're all going to look back and be like, yeah, Kylie was right on this first. Right.
Yep.
And if he falls off because so many pitchers do, no one's going to be like, man, Kylie, what were you thinking?
Yep.
Because you read that profile and you're like, if he's that, yeah, he's for sure a top 100 prospect.
Yep.
But he's 19.
Okay. And I agree with you, right? But let me present the yes, he belongs here side of this, because I've been thinking about this quite a bit today. And full transparency, I would not. So we've got the 3 Twins guys above him that you would expect, right? And various industry outlets have kind of mostly taken Zebby Matthews out of consideration as a prospect, which is whatever, right? But you've got Jenkins somewhere in the top 5, top 10, Erod somewhere in the top 25, and Keishel somewhere in the 40 to 65 range, which is fine. If you had asked me who is the next guy up for the Twins, I think I could make a case for 3 guys other than Soto, maybe 4, that you could at least say, yeah, I see the logic. I can make an argument for that, right? So I would have gone to, we've talked about Connor Prelip as a possibility. Kalen Culpepper is a guy that makes a lot of sense as their first round pick. Admittedly, he's only had a couple of months of professional baseball, but let me make a couple of points about why maybe this does make a ton of sense, right? So Charlie Soto pitched in A-ball as the youngest pitcher, I believe, in the entire league in his age 19 season, right? His back of the baseball card stats don't look incredibly impressive, but all of his underlying metrics are really, really strong. Strikes out plenty of dudes. We commented on this during the season. Sometimes the control and command comes and goes, but it's also noteworthy that last season he learned 2 new pitches as he was going in his first full season of professional baseball. Right. So he added a sinker, and he seems to be more inclined to this east-west profile, as Kylie mentions here, this kind of Luis Castillo comp, as opposed to a north-south guy like David Festa, who's much more a typical Twins type. And so if you put all of those things together, solid performance at A-ball as the youngest pitcher in the league, learned 2 new pitches, up to 97, 98 with a fastball, struck out guys at a high clip. It feels actually pretty easy to make the case that you can stick him, as you say, in a slot at the back of the top 100 where you could conceivably have any one of 20, 30, 40 guys and feel pretty good about that take.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on with that. And like you mentioned, though, there's other guys that you would feel just as comfortable sticking in there that are twins. You can find two guys on every team that would be like, yeah, that why not that guy? So it's super cool to be on that list. But when you go to a baseball reference page and you
Mhm.
see, their prospect rankings, and you see a guy that popped up in a top 100 at one point and then never showed back up, that's a little less cool. So let's just hope that he builds on this, because if you have a guy at this point in time at 19 years old that shows up on your list or shows up on any list, he's not going to be number 100 next year,
Right.
right? He's either going to fall off or he's going to make a meteoric rise up into the top 60 or
Hmm.
higher.
Yeah, I gotta say, it got me fired up. And the last thing I'll say on the Twins piece here before we move on and talk about the Cubs a little bit, this is exactly what the Twins need, right? Like if we look at their major league core right now, there's a lot of young dudes there that were recently prospects, right? You talk about guys like Eddie Julian or Matt Wallner or Brooks Lee or whoever. If you look at their top three guys, they're all going to be in the majors sooner than later. Erod and Keishel, you would think in particular. And so if the Twins want to maintain the standing of their farm system, they need to be able to continue to produce guys that can crack in to the top 100 that didn't come that way from the draft. And that's, I think, an important distinction when you look at some other systems in the AL Central. And the White Sox have received a lot of praise for the strength of their farm system recently.
Right?
Almost all of those guys they acquired via trade. They drafted Hagen Smith, Noah Schultz, a couple others, but most of those guys have come from outside the organization. And I do think that's a difference. And that'll be something I think that's really important for the Twins heading into 25, because a lot of those guys at the top are going to graduate at some point this year.
Yep. No, yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's move on and talk about the Cubs, Jeremy. There's been some Cubs news. They've been busy this week. One confirmed transaction that we want to dig into, and then one rumor I want to get your take on. So the Cubs traded for Ryan Presley, old friend from the Twins, with the Houston Astros. The second time they've linked up on a trade this season. The Astros send Ryan Presley and a bunch of money to cover his contract. Seemingly, the appeal for Presley was that he is going to be locked into a closer spot with the Cubs as opposed to playing second fiddle to Josh Hader. In return, the Cubs send a low-level prospect back to Houston. What do you make of this move for the Cubs? There was so much speculation about this happening until it finally did.
Yeah, so I think it's a really good move for the Cubs. If you're a team that is in contention, right,
Mm-hmm.
and you can get bullpen help for really not a whole lot, right? They didn't give up a top 30 prospect.
Mm-hmm.
They're not taking on a whole bunch of money. Um, I think it's an excellent maneuver by the Cubs. Um, and there's value there. And so when you can do something of value without depleting your depth, I think it's an excellent move. Um, a little weird for the Astros until I think we see what they do next. The rumors are that they wanted to free up some money so they can bring Bregman back and move Altuve to the outfield, which is interesting.
Interesting,
Uh,
that's right.
but good for the Cubs. I mean, they've been in the market for pitching help, and they got some in a proven closer who's got some gas in the tank still.
Yep. Yep. Echo all of that. Absolutely love it. I do think, right? Like, I've seen a lot of, it's interesting, Jeremy, when you start to talk about other teams that aren't your own, you start to just get more attuned to like the mood of that fan base. And as a non-Cubs fan, Cubs fans have felt really angsty this
Yeah,
offseason. And
for sure.
when you look at the roster building that they've done, I think they're in a pretty good spot heading into 2025, which brings us to the last topic I want to touch on with you before we get into our main thing for the day. And it's also Cubs related. We've talked about this a lot, right? So they've um, upgraded around the fringes. They got their superstar in Kyle Tucker. They got a back end of the bullpen arm in Ryan Presley. Another hot rumor with the Cubs at the moment is they are engaged with the Padres for starting pitcher Michael King, who I believe is also in, like Dylan Cease, in his last year of team control. Pitched 173.2 innings for the Padres last year to a 2.95 ERA, a 3.59 expected ERA. Strikes out plenty of guys, over 10 per 9. Throws plenty of strikes, limits the walks. What would you think about the Cubs going after and acquiring King as kind of the icing on the cake for their offseason?
Yeah, I think King's a real good pitcher, and if the Padres are looking to move off salary and move off players, why wouldn't you make that call if you're anybody?
Yep.
Again, the hard part is finding that common value where the Cubs are saying, "Yep, we're willing to pay it," and the Padres are saying, "Yep, that works for us." But I think it's the same as Cease, right? You're gauging interests. You're open for business, and that's kind of been the Padres' MO forever, right? We'll make a move for Craig Kimbrell, the opening day. We'll make that move with the Twins the day before opening day, and I work pretty closely with a pretty big Cubs fan, and so his gripe always is they operate like they're a small market team, and they're not. And why don't they operate like a large market team, that the large market team that they are? And so there's frustrations there. And so I think you just have to look everywhere. And I think that's not something that all teams have the luxury of doing. But when you are the Cubs, the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Mets, I guess there's probably a couple more. The Padres, I think, tend to act that way. You have every avenue available, and so I mean, if they're able to make the deal, it'd be a good deal for them. But I think that it's going to be, because I just when I was looking this up, it's like the Mets are rumored. It's like, of course they are.
Yeah, for sure.
If you got traded to the Dodgers, would that be shocking? Of course it wouldn't, because the Dodgers do what the Dodgers want. So yeah, I think the Cubs need to continue to try to add to that rotation,
100%.
and Mike King would be someone that should certainly interest them.
100% agree with all of that. Hope they continue to be aggressive. Add a playoff caliber starter to the rotation. Speaking of the Cubs, Jeremy, we're going to dig into the second of our team lists. So we're going to do dueling top 10 Cubs prospects starting right now. I'm really excited for this one because we had some good disagreements last week, and I feel like this week is gonna be plenty more of the same. So here's what we're gonna do. We'll take turns to kind of introduce a guy and their spot, give our rationale, and then we'll just get into some healthy debate along the way. We did this last week with the Brewers. Check that out if you haven't had a chance. In a couple of weeks, we'll do this with the Twins, also with Theo as a third perspective. So Jeremy, I went first this week, so you got to go first this week. Your number one Cubs prospect heading into 2025 is?
This was the easiest one for me. Not a whole lot of debate in my mind. Like the guy a ton coming out of college. They drafted him. I'm like, that's a great pick. Matt Shaw should be the number one on every list. I've obviously not seen every list that's out there, but I would assume that it's Matt Shaw on a majority of those lists. So right now the thought is that Matt Shaw can maybe be the opening day starter at third. And I'm a big fan of that. Tools across the board. Last year, played at two different levels, AA and AAA. And in AAA, batted almost 300 and 131 at bats. Combined had a 867 OPS, 21 home runs, 31 stolen bases, 95 strikeouts, but 62 walks. And there's just a ton to like about him. Yep. And I think that if he can prove that he belongs at third base in spring training, that he is going to be that guy in that position at Wrigley for a long, long time. So for me, that was pretty easy, cut and dry. Matt Shaw, number one, should be globally a top 20 prospect, and shouldn't be a prospect for more than another month or so once the season starts.
Yep. But what a beautiful summary. Could not agree any more with you, Jeremy. And in fact, I remember sitting in this very seat ahead of the first draft that we were really working on together, which was 2023, and saying to you, and I think we both agreed on this, if the Twins go under slot with a guy at 5,
Yep.
there's only one guy I'd be comfortable with it being, and it was Matt Shaw.
Yep.
And he didn't last too much longer than that. And that's an absolutely loaded draft class. So I don't really have anything to add onto that other than I'll be curious to see where his defensive home ends up being. I don't think the glove is as polished and as exciting as all of the offensive tools. I don't really think that matters one bit. I'll just also add on Shaw. He is an incredibly fun player to watch. Very unorthodox, unusual swing, look at the plate. He's like a slider guy. He's really, really fun to watch. I cannot wait to see him hopefully thrive this summer for the Cubs. That was a lock at 1. And I don't think, Jeremy, I've seen a list that he hasn't been at number 1 at. He's a top, 25 guy, global prospect guy too. I should have gone first. But I'll go second. So my number 2 guy, and I'll be curious to compare notes with you. And I had some debate about this. And if we don't disagree at 2, we'll certainly disagree at 3. But my number 2 is a pitcher who had a disappointing 2024 season and needs to get right. The Cubs need this guy to contribute in a meaningful way. He was the helium prospect, I want to say, of the 2022 draft cycle. I remember being absolutely shocked that the Cubs took him when they did, because we were locked into like there's 5 guys in this draft and we hope the Twins can get one. And Cade Horton was not one of the names that we were talking about. I really had an injury-plagued 2024, limited to just 34 innings, a 4.18 xFIP, struck out guys at a healthy clip, 28%, walked 9%, which is just fine. But the stuff was down a little bit, and the Cubs are going to need and hope that he gets back to full health. His stuff's back. Shoulder problems are a little bit scary. So Cade Horton was my number 2 guy. I just could not ding him really, given that he missed time due to injury. And even with his stuff being down, his performance in those 34 innings was fine. He is another guy on the cusp of contributing, at the major league level. Who you got at number 2?
I actually had Horton at 2 as well.
Yes, let's go.
And I didn't love it because it's, for me, it's a lot of, well, what have you done for me lately? And he hadn't done much.
Yep.
But I do think the upside is still great when you back up a little bit in a season, and then that season ends up as being a shutdown because of a shoulder. You got to wonder how much that was bothering you. So you have some long-term worry about that, right?
Yep.
But I do think that my dogs are going to bark.
That's okay. They're always welcome, Jeremy.
So when you back up a little bit, you worry about the shoulder, you worry about that long-term. Knowing that he was a two-way guy, you think that there's going to be some bounce back, hopefully, because he hadn't pitched a ton, and then he threw 88 innings in his draft year, and now he's at 34 last year. So you hope that you can build that back up, but I do think the upside is incredible, and so that's why I had him at number 2.
And I think there's a case to be made with Horton, just quickly before we move on, that he's actually more important for 2026 than 2025, right? So if we look at how the Cubs rotation is projected, right, I'm going to make a dangerous assumption, which is that Jed Hoyer is going to go get a really solid additional starter for the top of this rotation. That would put you at Imanaga, Steele, and let's just say Dylan Cease for the sake of argument, right? That's like really, really strong. If you project ahead to 2026, you're going to be losing a few guys from that group, and there's uncertainty around some of the rest. Like you're relying heavily on Matthew Boyd this season, which is something I don't know that I feel super comfortable doing. And so all of that to say, I'm not saying that Horton can't make a significant contribution this year, but I think that long-term kind of planning aspect to it, gives the Cubs a permission structure to take their time with him, in addition to the injury troubles he struggled with in 2024. Take your time, get him right. Make sure the stuff is where you want it to be. Make sure the shoulder's healthy. Have him in AAA for as long as he needs to be in AAA. And I think that's even more of an argument for being aggressive in acquiring another guy at the top of your rotation.
Yep. And I do think that that's 100% accurate. But if he takes off, you certainly introduce him to the 2020 bullpen potentially, and see what he's got when you unleash him.
Okay, so I'm gonna make a prediction before I tell you. Wait, just kidding. It's you're up for prospect number 3. But before you do your guy, I'm gonna make a prediction that our next 4 we might have the same guys in a different order, or at least 3 out of 4. So I'm curious, who do you have at number 3?
Okay, so this is where it got more difficult for me.
Sure.
And had to kind of balance. For me, a lot of it's upside. But when all of this next group is kind of in the same area.
Yeah. Yep.
It's for me, it's looking at things that I really don't like, and those guys end up floating down. Sinking, I think, is the correct word for that. And so the guys that sink the least, because we're talking about top 100 prospects, right? Global top 100 guys.
Pull the Band-Aid up.
My number 3 guy is Moises Ballesteros.
Okay.
Who is really good with the bat.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe doesn't stick as a catcher, but just looking at his numbers in AA, AAA this year, 289, 825 OPS, 19 home runs, which has gone up every year, 93 strikeouts, 45 walks, so gets on base a ton, 24 doubles. Like, you're getting production off, like legitimate offensive production from a left-handed batting catcher, if he can remain a catcher. And if not, like, these are numbers that will play in the corner. And so if he's a first baseman, that's fine. Comfortable DHing him, great. The value's all in the bat, and if he can catch, that's even better. But I wasn't high on him last year, but when you do what you do what he did at age 21 now, and he did it in AA and AAA, that to me, it was just the guy that floated up to the top of the list. Yep.
It makes a ton of sense. I can get on board with it. I had him at 4. And so this is our first divergence, but yeah, big fan. I think I remember being decently bullish on him when we went through this exercise this time last year, and he just hits. I mean, what do you want? He doesn't look the part of anything. He's like 5'7", 220, but he just hits, and he hits for power. He's great. I cannot disagree with that. He had 127 WRC plus across AA and AAA last year. Like you said, just 8 Ks 18% of the time, walks at a decent clip. That's just really, really solid. So I went with a risk for my number 3 guy. And it's just a personal cheese ball that I cannot quit.
Okay.
Kevin Alcantara, number 3 for me. And I realize that this is maybe going to be probably like an unpopular pick, right? But for me, in this 3 through 6 range, I would argue that there are 4 guys who are at least comparable that you can arrange in some order.
Yep.
Alcantara, outfielder, just 22 years old, 6'6", 190. That is an alien frame. 6'6", 190. He's almost gotten to the point of like post prospect hype a little bit. And I realize that sounds silly for someone who's played like 3 games at the major league level, but he had a 124 WRC plus across AA and AAA in 2024. And we were just, took a bunch of time praising Ballesteros for a 127 WRC plus. 14 home runs for Alcantara, 9% walk rate. You'd like to see that a little bit higher. 26% K rate. That's okay. Can play legit outfield defense. And I just think that's already a very solid foundation of production in the upper minors. You also bet potentially, and this is what I'm doing, that there is an extra gear of athleticism and twitch and potential in that like frame and that body that he can take it to another gear that maybe Ballesteros cannot. And so what you see now is Alcantara is dotted all over top 100 prospect lists. I've seen him in like the 20s, and I've also seen him in the 90s, and I get it. But he was my guy at number 3, and that's the rationale I got. What
So I
say
have
you?
him. I have him at number 5.
Okay, can live with it.
Just on the account of, I think that there's a chance to hit real high. Sorry, I was distracted by Chris Finch just losing his mind. Ant had, I think he got thrown out. Ant had to like come to his defense, and Ant's always like Chris Finch was definitely ejected.
Well, Chris Finch is a lot. I feel like Chris Finch's real problem right now is the Wolves' veteran players, as opposed to anything that's really going on with the refs or anything else on the court. He seems real mad at his guys a lot.
So what happened was he was standing next to the inbounder, and the ref turns and says something to him, and Finch says, "I didn't say anything."
Oh,
and
Lord.
then he tees him up and throws him out of the game. So that'll be interesting. But anyway, I do think that there's upside there, but I do think that the success rate on really tall dudes that have strikeout issues in Double A and Triple A, there's issues there. Now Aaron Judge has kind of calmed some fears of super tall people.
Yep, super tall people.
But that's my concern. I was also told by Cubs fan that I need to point out that his nickname is Jaguar because that seems relevant. But yeah, I had him at number 5 just because and we'll get to it, but I like him a little bit more than the guy that he's very similar to, in my opinion.
Yeah. That's super interesting. I'm excited. Okay, so maybe we have a little bit more divergence here than I thought. So I had Alcantara at 3. You have him at 5. You had Moises Ballesteros at 3. I had him at 4, which begs the question, who do you have at 4, Jeremy?
So I was a fan of this guy a few years ago.
Okay.
And he's only hit since then.
This your AFL guy, huh?
AFL guy. So when you believe, you got to be the guy that is on him first and then is on him the longest, right? So James Trianos wasn't a guy, and then hit in the AFL, and now is a guy, and so doesn't hit for a ton of power, but has hit 300 last year over 2 levels, 300 in Double A, in 357 at bats, 302 in Triple A in 86 at bats. Didn't hit a single AAA home run. Had 7 home runs in Double A, but stole 47 bases. Struck out only 54 times. Walked 27 times. So he's going to get on base. You could bat him in the probably in the 2 spot. He's not going to be like a middle of the order guy, and I think that's okay. And has defensive flexibility. Now, is that because he's good defensively in a lot of positions? Maybe not so much. But the Cubs have really made a habit of having these types of players and getting a lot out of them. So probably the high guy on him, but he's a top 100 guy, probably back half of the 50, back 50 of the top 100
for sure.
But I think there's a lot of guys in the mix right here, and for me, it's I think the safest of that group, and will be. If not a regular at a position, will at least be a regular cog in a lineup that can start making impacts like the Ben Zobrist, the Ian Haps, the Willie Castros, where you're just getting like the sum of the parts is going to be greater.
Yep. So I do remember, and you have a right to be smug about this for years to come. When we did our like AFL like picks from each org, you were like, "This is the guy for me," and he just absolutely decimated the AFL, just like way too good. Triantos is he's interesting for me. So 773 OPS, and you pointed this out, Jeremy, but the impact is less. 123 WRC plus. So we've got 3 guys now in Alcantara, Ballesteros, and Triantos after Shaw that have a WRC plus in the 120s across both AA and AAA last year. That's very interesting, and I want to come back to that. Triantos is interesting, steals a lot of bases, and also doesn't walk a lot. Almost never, actually. 5.6% walk rate, doesn't strike out much either. I remember, and I think I've said this maybe 30 times on the show, advocating for him to be the one that they traded.
Yeah, that's fair.
And the reason why is I just like it's not guaranteed impact, right? And he's also not a great defender. And so for me, I have these two kind of offsetting forces where he's fast and he steals bases. Great value add. He also doesn't really have a defensive home. In fact, he's kind of a weak defender. And so where is he going to slot? The Cubs have strength defensively in their middle infield. I'm not sure where he's going to go. You can certainly shuffle him around, but to me, he was always the one logically that I was like, find someone who's in love with the hit tool, because I feel like the hit tool is like a legit 60. It's a 60 hit. Like he hits 300 everywhere he goes. Find someone who loves the hit tool and trade for something else that you need. So I had Triantos at 6. So only one spot behind you. Which now makes me very confused. I think I have to do my 5 guy.
Yes, because my
okay.
1, 2, 3, 4. Well,
and Triantos was 5 for you.
Triantos was 4.
4. Have you haven't done your 5, or you
haven't done my 5, and you haven't done your 5, but your 6 is revealed.
Okay.
So yeah, we're on 5.
I should definitely keep track of this next time. Okay, my number 5 is the last bat from this cluster of AA, AAA performers that the Cubs have. And when we're done talking about this guy, I kind of want to talk about like, what do you do with this group? So Owen Casey is number 5 for me, outfielder. Hit 278, 375, 472. That's good for 848 OPS. I think that was exclusively at AAA in 2024. Walks 12% of the time, which is great. Strikes out a ton, 28% of the time. This is kind of like a Matt Wallner-ish profile. 19 home runs, 121 WRC plus, max exit velocity of 116 miles per hour. I mean, that's like upper echelon, like top of the scale power from Casey. He's close as well. A 4th guy who's in that bucket of like AA, AAA performers. So he was number 5 for me. Where did he slot for you?
So he was number 6 for me.
Okay.
I actually flip-flop him in Alcantara just because he strikes out so much. Mm-hmm. And I know that you can get away with that, but to me, when you do it as much as he's done it in his career, it's not like this is new. I mean, he was striking out he strikes out more than once a game in every level that he's played. Like, so you're talking a significant percentage of his plate appearances just end up in him walking back to the dugout. Now, there's going to be value. There's going to be value there because of when he does hit it, there's problems. Mm-hmm. I just always concerned about guys that strike out as much as he does, and that's why he's 6. But again, we're talking about a global top 100 guy. So in a typical organization, like he's getting dinged from 2 to 3, right? Mm-hmm. Or from 1 to 2. He's not getting dinged from 2 to 6 because I think there's people that probably have him as high as 2 or at least 3. So yeah, I mean, figure that out a little bit. Obviously, he was the first to make it to AAA out of this group, and he will be 22 until July. He's young, so there's certainly upside, and he's deserving of the accolades, but the strikeouts just concern me.
So help me with this question, because I like to oversimplify things, and I get stuck in my little thought processes when I'm thinking about guys. You have now 6 top 100-ish guys in this system. You've got Shaw, who's the standout hitter, Horton, who's the standout arm. Then you have 4 guys who ended the season at AAA and had AWRC plus in the 120s. They're all above average hitters in their own way. This is so bunched to me at in the upper minors levels that I felt like aggressively compelled to trade somebody from this group to strengthen the major league roster. And I'm wondering if you agree with that, or if you can convince me that you can find at-bats for these guys as they're ready. Someone's going to get hurt. It's a bumpy road. Someone will fall back, all that good stuff. What's your position? Are you like trade a guy, or are you like, no, hold and see what happens?
I'd have to dig a little bit deeper on this group, because what you want to do is you end up in a 40-man crunch. That's when it becomes really difficult. And if you're not in a 40-man crunch, because you're adding them, 1 year, 2 a year, or whatever, a lot of foreign guys, if done correctly when brought up, they could qualify for that fourth option if needed. So for me, it would be where are we in that situation? I think generally it would be easier if you kind of hit the reset button with one or two of these guys with younger dudes, because we haven't talked about our number 7.
Can't wait.
But you've seen 7 in the top 100, and this doesn't include the fact that they traded Cam Smith, who would be in the top 10, would be in the top 7, right?
Be in the top 5.
I would argue. In my opinion, a deal that they made a year ago with the Dodgers, we got rid of Jackson Ferris, who would be in my top 10. And Zaire Hope, who would be in my top 10. This would be very interesting, because you'd have potentially 10 different guys in the top 100.
That's crazy.
You don't make those deals, but you've traded the 3 guys that are at the lowest part. Like, in hindsight, would it have made more sense to keep a Cam Smith and trade one of the guys that's bunched up, or keep a Zaire Hope and trade one of those other outfielders? In hindsight, I think, yes, it would have.
Maybe Cam Smith is not the example of that, though, because he already made it to AA at the end of last season. I feel you on Zaire Hope, though.
But I mean, these other guys are going to be all AAA or in the majors, and sure. So it's weird to me, because it's like, God dang, they would literally have 10 guys in the top 100 if they wouldn't have made those deals. And so I'm a little less worried about, well, can we get them at bats in the majors? It doesn't matter, because you can stick them in AAA and let their value go up, let them continue to mash. And if you have guys at AAA that are just too good for AAA, that's not a problem, right? We've seen it with our favorite team last year. It's like, oh, how is Julian going to get in the – how is Brooks Lee? It always works out, because teams play more than 26 guys. They play 40 guys. They play 50 guys. And so I don't have those same concerns as you do, unless it's like, oh, shoot, at the end of the year, we got to have 8 guys that we had to the 40-man, and that's just bad for roster maintenance. Management. So, yeah, a little. I definitely see where you're coming from. Just don't necessarily share that same opinion.
Fair enough. Let's roll on to the back half here. It's about to get weird. For sure, it's about to get weird from my perspective. I believe we're on number 7, Jeremy. Right. So you're up for who's your 7th guy?
So Jefferson Rojas is 7, pretty easy for me.
Okay.
A little bit lower, right? So he played his whole season at high A, wasn't fantastic, but just again, it's upside, and he has plenty of that. He's 19, will turn 20 in April, but checks all the boxes for a prospect that you want. He's going to have to improve with the production. But hard not to like that guy. Stole 21 bases, hit only 6 home runs, batted only 245, so didn't produce as well as you'd hope, but is going to likely be a shortstop and has a ton of value. So you're going to see him on a lot of top 100 lists or right outside the top 100. But I think pretty universally probably the 7th prospect in the system, although I did see one that had him as high as 4th.
Not for me. Although I have Rojas 8, and I did that for two reasons. One is I wanted to shoehorn someone I really like into the 7th spot, and I was like, you know
Okay.
what, Jefferson Rojas, you had a really poor 2024, and I'm gonna ding you a lot for that.
Okay.
But I think like if you surveyed everyone that does prospect lists, 100% you're right. He's the 7th guy. My number 7 guy is pitcher Brandon Birdsell.
Okay. I was
And
gonna say, when you said pitcher, I'm like, you better say the only name that makes sense here. If you
um,
say Jackson Wiggins, I'm gonna play one of those preloaded music things
yeah.
that we discovered. But yeah, I go on with him because I think that's a good selection.
Yeah, so here's why. This is less of an upside play to me and more of a he's almost ready to contribute, and the Cubs are not flush with starting pitching prospects, but he is a really, really solid one. So he was first drafted by the Twins, actually, as a draft eligible sophomore, decided to go back to school, then won Big 12 Pitcher of the Year. 135.2 innings last year, 363 xFIP, struck out 24% of guys. Still some room to grow there, although that's nothing to sniff at. Walked just 5% of dudes. Fastball's up to 95. Throws a really hard slider, 87 miles an hour, curveball, and a changeup. I mean, this is just a starting pitches repertoire. He has shown durability. He has shown performance at every minor league level. And he is another guy who I believe we are going to see make their debut in 2025. And he might not have the upside of Cade Horton, but I think you have a solid mid to back of the rotation starting pitcher here in the way that the Twins seem to produce 10 of those guys every couple of years. This is a Cubs example. And I think if everything goes well, you've maybe got like a number 3, 4 type starting pitcher. And so I wanted to kind of reward him for his consistency, his durability, excellent performance. So Brandon Birdsell is number 7 for me, and I have Rojas at 8.
Yeah, and I have Birdsell at 8. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And really, that was the end of where I think things were clear.
Yeah. Yes.
Because he's everything that you said is accurate. Like there's not a ton of upside, but the floor is high. He's going to be a solid major league pitcher. I think in my mind, he's more likely destined for the bullpen.
Mm-hmm.
But you give guys an opportunity to be a starter first. So no, I think you're right on with that one, and I got no arguments with you for having him even above Rojas.
Okay, we got 2 more to go. Jeremy, do you want to take 9? I feel like you could throw in like 7 or 8 different guys here, honestly.
Probably more than that if we want to really get down to it. I think there's a big group where the difference between even 9 and 25 is probably not significant.
Okay.
And so we're a few levels lower than where we just were. So for me, it was like, do we have guys like Birdsell that are close?
Uh-huh.
Like that floor is just going to lift them up to that level.
Okay.
We don't. So I went Ronnie Cruz, all upside. I mean, he's 18 and is young, and hopefully there's some chance for him to do it. He graduated from a high school in Florida. Could have been an international signing at one point, but moved to the States, was injured, and they ended up drafting him in 2024 in the 3rd round, giving him a decent bonus to sign him away from Miami, and he didn't even make his pro debut. So 6'2", 170-pound, 18-year-old shortstop. That it's all about upside, right?
This is gonna make you look so good if he comes out and is great in 2025. I love it.
And there's a chance that he completely falls off the face of the planet, but I also think that's true about many of these guys. So I saw him on another list. He is in the top 10. I did see him as low as 25 on the list. So like I said, there's this huge range, but I'm going to err on the side of upside, and that's where I went with Cruz.
Okay, I like it. He's not in my top 10, nor did I consider him, but that's the beauty of going through this process. I am going to err on both upside and my drafty tendencies for my number 9 guy, Jackson Wiggins, right-handed pitcher who was a draft pick who I really didn't like at the time. I think I was really critical of the Wiggins pick because I went over slot to get him when he was injured, if I'm remembering correctly. Right-handed pitcher, finally back from after recovery from Tommy John. 59 innings pitched, mostly at A and high A in 2024. 380 xFIP, struck out 28% of guys and walked a ton. 14% walk rate is not going to get you anywhere fast. However, it's a 70 grade fastball. Like we're talking like triple digit heat here. It's a plus slider. It's an above average changeup. So he has 3 pitches that are above, like 1 pitch is above average, 2 I would call plus, and then like 40 grade control. So the question is, of course, can you harness that in some way, shape, or form? And I think best case scenario, you do. Suddenly you have, in a best case scenario, a weapon with serious stuff if he's on track to start. Worst case scenario, he's a guy who can go let eat in the back of the bullpen. Hopefully he can throw enough strikes to that and just rely on fastball slider. But Jackson Wiggins, I was excited to see him return after being out so long in on the back end of the 2024 season.
Yeah, and I think he's a guy that you got to consider. I hated the draft pick.
I did too. I did too.
And that's why he would be in the top 15 for me. I just couldn't bring him into my top 10. I would like to hear who your number 10 is.
Okay. So I also relied on a draft favorite for my number 10, but I just want to give a shout out for a guy who I considered strongly, Jack Neely, 6'8" right-handed pitcher who struck out 37.5% of the batters he faced in 2024 and is absolutely a reliever. But who cares? Because you need great relievers, and he's going to be a great reliever. So I considered him, but I ended up going for Cole Mathis, Jeremy, who was one of my absolute favorites in the 2024 draft. So he was originally a two-way player. They drafted him out of the College of Charleston. He had this otherworldly stint on the Cape Cod League where he hit 11 home runs in like 35 games there. He had previously been up to 97 miles an hour on the mound. So he has an absolute hose. I don't know where he's going to use that because he's not really a very good defender. Also has kind of a little bit of an unorthodox swing, but I think the Cubs are kind of into fixing weird swings. Cam Smith was a bit of a weird swing too. But he just hit and hit and hit in his last college season. I really liked him as one of the more well-rounded, balanced hit bats with a solid amount of pop in that 2024 draft class. So Cole Mathis was my number 10 guy. How about you?
I liked Mathis, considered him at 10 as well.
Okay.
Neely was on the short list.
Okay.
I actually, like I did last week, right? You give me 10, I got to get 10, but 10 is probably a guy that isn't maybe thought of as highly, but I want him on the list.
Fair enough.
And so this guy, again, like my last guy, didn't do a whole lot of playing last year because he was a draft pick, but from the prep ranks. And so Ty Southazine, who has had production because he played for USA Baseball, but has a lot of questions. The Cubs have had more success with like getting guys that maybe didn't fit like the prospect profile that then all of a sudden start doing prospect type things. And so I think there's a good chance that we see him kind of elevate his game. He's got to get stronger, but if you're going to do that, it's easier to do at 19 years old than it is to do at 27 years old, right? Yeah. And so again, this is an upside play because he's not overly physical, right? He's 5'9", 170, but at his age and just having the acumen to play baseball, I think there's a chance that he becomes much more. So he's my number 10 with kind of an asterisk because if you would have given me 15, I might find guys that I like more than him, but I wanted to recognize him as a higher prospect. And like I said, anybody from really 8 or 9 to the mid 20s, we're gonna be in the same area, and I think it's you maybe look at this system a little bit differently because it's so stacked up top.
Yep.
And if you have 3 guys there, maybe it's a half dozen other guys that kind of float up. But when you have 7 guys that or 8, because I think Birdsall belongs in that group too. When you have 8 guys that are just that much better, it just makes everybody else feel relatively similar. Is that how you feel about it too?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and I see the logic in your pick. I believe Suthasem was committed to Tennessee, and we're in danger of straying into college baseball territory. But the guy who he was drafted as a shortstop, I believe. The guy who is incumbent at shortstop at Tennessee currently is one of my favorite 2025 bats that we will talk about another day. There's also another Suthasem on the way in the 2025 draft. I think his little brother is going to be draftable this year too. So there's 3 or 4 of them. I get the logic of the pick for sure.
So Ty has a twin brother T.
I don't remember which one is draft eligible this year.
Draft eligible, this one I believe is Tate.
Okay, there you go. I think he's actually thought of as maybe a little bit better of a prospect than his brother, but we'll see how that shakes out.
I mean, at least the parents didn't name them all similar names. They had 3 different names in Ty, T, and Tate.
Good Lord. Good stuff. That was really fun. We're going to finish up with a quick listener question that I'm going to knock out here just to anticipate some of the content that we have coming up. So Corey, who got in touch on Blue Sky, always has a bunch of great questions. We appreciate you, Corey. Said college baseball is back in or kicks off in a few weeks. Any local prospects or storylines to follow? So a couple of quick mentions I wanted to give because I am very excited to start talking about amateur baseball again. Not necessarily prospects to follow yet. But I did want to mention that the Golden Gophers are under new leadership. Ty McDevitt is their new head coach after John Anderson retired after many, many, many years at the helm. And there's usually a big tournament that kicks off the college season. And for the past couple of years, that had actually been one of those have been held in US Bank Stadium. So you could see really good college baseball locally. And unfortunately,
the Cambria Classic, right?
That's the one. Yeah. They're not doing that because I guess they're doing work on the stadium or whatever. So they're not having that tournament here. I believe the Gophers are traveling and they are close to the beginning of their season, kicking off with the tournament. I believe it's in Dallas-Fort Worth, February 21st through 23rd against Oregon State, Virginia, and Oklahoma, which is just a gauntlet. I mean, those first 2 teams, Oregon State is going to be a top 10, 12 team. Virginia, I think, is like a top 3 or 4 team in the country preseason. So the Gophers are really going to have a stern test. But keep an eye out for that. I'm not sure if it will be televised or not. But if you're into college baseball, an ESPN Plus subscription is an absolute must in your life. It'll be fun. All right. I think that about does us for today. So we will be back next week with another episode. We're going to do something fun. We're going to do next week a kind of summary of top 100 guys across lists, where they fall, talk about them, chop it up, talk about who's going to be next for the teams that we follow the most. Following week after that, we'll dig into Twins top 10 with Theo. Should be really fun. Until then, catch you guys next time. Take it easy.